Hi, everybody. This section on divided attention 8687, it's not very long, but it's phrased in such a way with some older research that I think we could go ahead and just get a take-home message. So these authors, Spelke, Hurst, and Neisser, and again, you could see, here's Neisser again going back 50 years with some, I guess you could say, foundational research. 5 days a week for 17 weeks, working in 1-hour sessions, students learned to write words that were dictated while they read short stories. And after their reading comprehension was periodically tested, and after 6 weeks of practice, pretty unusual study, their reading rates approached their normal speeds, even though they were taking dictation. Also, by the end of the 6 weeks, their scores on reading comprehension tests were comparable, whether they were only reading stories and thus presumably giving the reading task their full attention, or reading stories while writing the dictated words. So further investigation revealed that participants could also categorize the dictated words by meaning and could discover relations among them without compromising any speed. Now, some psychologists were surprised that the participants in the study could process information about meaning without conscious attention, and some offered alternative explanations. One hypothesis is that participants alternated their attention between the two tasks, basically bouncing back and forth. And this possibility was not directly tested. The authors argued the fact that the participants' reading speed was comparable, whether or not they were taking the dictation, suggests they were not just bouncing back and forth. So, another set of authors in 1980 found evidence against this alternation. That's unlikely to be true. A second explanation for participants' ability to learn to do two things at once is that one of the two tasks is relatively automatic. According to one criteria for it being automatic, is that processing doesn't interfere with another mental activity, and taking dictation might be considered to be relatively automatic, pretty easy. So participants were clearly aware that the words were being dictated, and they typically recognized about 80% of them later, but the participants clearly intended to copy the dictated words, and therefore taking dictation does not meet the other criteria: lack of intention and lack of awareness. So it's a little complicated, but you could say at least that if one thing is relatively automatic, the other controlled task can still prosper. So there is one dissenting opinion, and there are a lot of explanations. One of the things that Galati does is bounces back and forth between arguments, and sometimes is a little exhaustive. But Hurst et al. Offered evidence against the possibility that one task becomes automatic. Participants trained to copy complete sentences while reading were able to comprehend and recall these sentences, suggesting that the participants had processed the dictation task for meaning. This in turn suggests that they paid at least some attention to the dictation, given that most psychologists believe that automatic process occurs without comprehension, so they couldn't have paid attention to the meaning. A third explanation, yet another one, for how participants were able to perform the two tasks at once, which they favored, is that participants learned to combine the two separate tasks basically in some sort of efficient way, reading and taking the dictation. That is, practice with these two tasks caused the participants to perform the tasks differently than the way they did them at first, and they basically made an adjustment to both of them. This implies that if either one of the tasks were combined with a third task, additional practice would be needed before the two tasks could be done together efficiently again. So, bottom line, practice appears to play some role in performance and is an important predictor of how much attention a task requires. And there is some argument about how these participants were able to do so well after 6 weeks, but at the very least, practice must be at the core of it, whether they were paying attention to the dictated words or not, and there is a clear evidence that they were. So this is one of those sections, and this chapter is involved. It quotes 3 and 4 studies right in a row, contradicting each other, bounce back and forth. And so I feel as though sometimes I'm charged with getting the best take-home message that I possibly can. And that's the one I can glean from this section the best, is that the practice makes things relatively automatic, or at least able to be done together with some degree of certainty. And I suppose we can think of things that we do that are done together that may be efficient as a result of practice. So sometimes I'll take meaningful work over to University Coffee, and although it's a sometimes crowded and bustling place, and I can't help but hear others' conversations, and there are a lot of conversations going on there, and also the blender when they're making drinks, etc. Nonetheless, I'm able to plow through and get things done, and maybe there is some degree of practice there that allows me to do two things at once. So, again, the evidence contradicts itself at some points, but I think that's one take-home message.